She began taking me through what seemed like a past life regression. I never trusted that stuff as much as I'd done a couple of those things back then. Closed my eyes and she said, I want you to imagine a hallway. I could see a hallway just like I can see you on this video here. Wow, how's that happening? And I looked down and there is this tiny fairy angel. I would love to hug her. As soon as I did, I shrank in size and I burst into light. I was pure energy and I was in what I consider God consciousness or superconscious mind.
In Love Cover Life Academy, we're going to be working through the energy centers of the body, balancing, grounding them, and getting the energy flowing to stimulate a powerful spiritual awakening. In the month of June, we'll be starting with a masterclass on the root center. Check the description to purchase the masterclass separately or find the link to join Love Covered Life Academy and have access to all the monthly masterclasses as well as the exclusive community and the monthly live Q&A at a deeply discounted rate. I am here today with Katherine Skaggs. She is an award-winning visionary artist and author, shamanic practitioner, wise woman, mystic, spiritual guide, and painter of souls. She's had a lifetime of spiritual experiences studying the mystery traditions, and we're just going to dive in today and see where this conversation takes us. Thank you for joining me, Katherine.
Thanks for asking, Melissa. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. So I would like to start at the beginning. Where did your spiritual journey begin?
Oh, that's a great question. I grew up in Oklahoma and I jumped into a Baptist family and I knew I loved God, but I didn't exactly like the church so much.
A lot of us
A
share
lot of
that
sense.
feeling.
It didn't make a lot of sense, that hellfire damnation stuff. So it actually started to come into my awareness in my late teens and actually more in my 20s. And mostly, I hate to say this, but it happens to many of us, is that is because I was suffering. I was in my 20s. I wasn't really doing what I wanted to. I'd gotten a degree and I was curious about how to be better, just to be myself, because I had manifested an eating disorder. I had PTSD I didn't know I had from childhood. Didn't know that in my conscious mind at the time. And through a series of events, I ended up landing in Kansas City when my boyfriend said, well, I wanted to go to art school. And I said, well, why not? And I thought, why not? But it was synchronistic to someone handing me a pamphlet on Unity Church and more of a mother-father God, which got my interest. Ultimately, when I got to Kansas City, I stumbled synchronistically into a metaphysical store and found all these books on spirituality that was not like what I grew up with. And, the interesting thing, I have to go back and say, somewhere in my psyche and in my soul, I knew something different than what I was landed in as a soul into that family. I was reading the Tao Te Ching when I was 13. Where I
Wow.
found it, even in Oklahoma, I have no idea. And I remember at 16 asking my mom about reincarnation. And she said, well, we don't believe in that, so I don't know what to tell you. So I had some nuggets, but when I was younger, and so I always like to say inside of us is a spiritual GPS or a soul's GPS or SGS, and that I was being led on this path in my 20s. So in Kansas City, I found someone doing channeling and introducing me to spiritual principles. And I ended up coming back to Oklahoma after I graduated from art school there in my late 20s, mid to late 20s. And I found a school of metaphysics along with a wonderful metaphysical store in Oklahoma. And that opened my doors. And that was really foundational to a lot of mystical experiences, to knowing that I could actually learn to reawaken my intuition. I had gone to a psychic fair and met a gal before I signed up for these metaphysical classes, and she did this crystal ball reading for me. And I thought, how did you know that? It's kind of scared me because I'm like, I felt a little naked. And she said, "You can learn this too. It's natural for you." I said, "I can't do that. Are you kidding me?" And she says, "No, it's innate in you. We just usually shut it off by the time we're 7 years of age, or depending on our family and our culture around us. We start getting messages that our dreams aren't real. We get messages that synchronicity isn't real, usually in our culture." And so I did. I got in classes and I started out doing not only reading, but the crux of anything I find that's any good spiritually is to have practices that we dive into. So we had concentration exercises that led into more advanced lessons and psychometry, astral projection. Those are several years down the line. It just started out with me learning to focus my mind. And then that's kind of led to everything else. So that was a lot of info. So I'm going to take a breath and say, what else?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned it started out with learning to focus your mind. That really does seem to be the starting point for so many spiritual practices, but yet it's the thing that we're not really taught in our culture. We don't grow up and go to school and learn how do you focus your mind? How do you quiet your mind? And most of us just struggle with these restrictive thought patterns for our entire lives.
Absolutely. I think one of my first teachers said, "Did you hear growing up, pay attention? But did anyone teach you what that meant?" We got scolded oftentimes to quit goofing off or whatever and straighten up, pay attention. And it's like, nobody ever taught us that. And I remember I had the opportunity, I was in the School of Metaphysics for 4 years and I became a teacher and a director of schools. And I ultimately went to College of Metaphysics in Wendyville, Missouri, of all places, out in the Ozarks. And we had kid camp during that time. So we had a small number of kids who came and we taught them some of the beginning exercises because most of them were struggling in school, had self-esteem issues, and at a really basic level of just living a life that you can honor your sensitivity, be more aware, that also connects you to your inner self, to your inner dimensions of consciousness. So we taught these kids some very simple mindfulness exercises to teach them how to focus. And we did it using the second hand on a clock, which not everybody has because we have a lot of digital clocks now, but it was the kids just for a minute at a time would learn to follow the second hand. That doesn't sound like a lot of time, but we built them up to 5 minutes and ultimately got them to 10 minutes. Their grades increased, their self esteem increased. They started to realize where they were in time and space in terms of their focus. And because how many people are in the future or in the past and not present time? And if we want our psychic senses, our intuition to expand, it's that matter of being 100% present here and now and recognizing where your interpretation system in the physical world, your five senses are, when they are more intentional and you're present in your body, then you can activate your sixth sense of intuition. And that it all begins to weave together. We start seeing how everything is created by your thoughts and your focus. I hate to say that, but we do participate in our creative adventure here, whether we know it or not.
Wow, okay, so there's so much we could get into there, but I think that's invaluable advice because I'm a mother, I have 3 young children, and I've often wondered to myself, how can I teach them these skills? How to meditate, how to focus their mind. There's not a lot of information out there, so I really like the practical advice that you gave there.
And you know what, too, Melissa, is start them small. And, actually in the school, they didn't teach us meditation for like 6 weeks. We started with a 10-minute concentration exercise every day. And then after 2 weeks, if we were doing what we were supposed to do, which I jumped in wholeheartedly, then we started to add a second 10-minute exercise. But for kids, start them at 2 minutes
Mhm.
and then see where they go with it.
Right. Kind of a side question related to that. When you're teaching somebody meditation or concentration, like especially with a young child, how do you know if it's sticking with them or if they're just daydreaming the whole time?
Well, Part of it would be to, let me think of a different exercise. It's like that second hand. Instead of doing something like that, you could use a candle flame,
Mhm.
and you say, okay, for 2 minutes, I want you to gaze at that candle flame, but you're going to get a piece of paper
Mhm.
and a pen or pencil for them, and tell them that every time they think of something besides the candle flame, like, oh, my body itches, or wonder, I'm ready for a snack, or I heard the dog bark, tell them to just make a mark on the page. It's not good, it's not bad. It's being aware of their thoughts or their feelings, their sensations, so that they start to track it. And actually, sometimes the more marks that are on that page, the more you know that they're tracking where their thoughts are or their
Mhm.
feelings. That could be a very tangible feedback system for them to go, and you go, what were you thinking of with those every time you made a mark? Do you remember? Because then it gives you a conversation to know what was happening for them. And because it's not about blanking out the mind, it's being aware of if the mind is wandering, and if you can redirect it. It's like going to the gym and building that muscle every time you lift a weight. You're
Mhm.
teaching them to track where their focus is. And
Mm.
that's an easy feedback system for you, I think.
That is so helpful. Another thing that you said that was really interesting is that we need to come into our bodies and be present with our five senses, and that's what opens the sixth sense of intuition. And I think a lot of us, I know I did for many years, misunderstood and thought in order to connect with my intuition, I have to transcend my body, I have to get out of my body.
I think that is kind of a bit of a misnomer with metaphysics and some spiritual practices, is that we just want to leave here. It's like, oh no. That's where shamanism that I've gotten involved with the last 17, 18 years or so, is it helped me ground and understand that I can't really heal anything or change anything if I'm not in my body. We're meant to be in our bodies here. We just, if our nervous systems are frightened or we're in fear, we've had trauma, we do leave our bodies, and we're not always here. That's where depression comes from. That's where lack of life force comes from. So many different things I could diagnose as probably a trauma someone had at some point in time, that they're not 100% present. So doing these exercises helps bring you present, because I know I always was like trying to get out of my body. I didn't want to be here. It was too hard,
Yeah, me
too
too.
painful emotionally because I was empathic. But yeah, it's being grounded. And I incorporate that more now because of my shamanic journeys for the last number of years that I mentioned. It's helped me understand that I got these great practices in my earlier years that were very esoteric, but the mind body spirit was not always there. I mean, I got physically ill after I opened a metaphysical store and had it for like 8 years. I stayed so busy, I was completely out of balance, and I wasn't taking care of my body. I was very mental, as much as I'm a water sign, of very emotional too, but I was running myself ragged, not understanding the cycles and the seasons for myself. And there was, again, was a root chakra type thing that I hadn't healed that was throwing me out of balance. So yeah, these exercises can be great to notice, am I taking care of myself? Am I present in my body? And everything I know about our five senses of interpretation, they're part of our navigation system to get to that intuition and really trust it.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I'd like to go back to your story. So, we left off where you were beginning to learn these spiritual practices. And I know you said in your bio that you walked a metaphysical spiritual path woven with mystery school teachings from Egypt, temple times to Hindu, Buddhist, and Taoist teachings and practices, as well as many energy healing practices. And there's probably more here than we can fit into an hour, but I'd love to hear some of the, most important parts of your journey, I guess.
I think one thing that's impacted me when I started, besides the exercises that they had from beginning to intermediate to advanced exercises, had a lot to do with learning about universal laws and truths. That in this universe, at least, I don't know if anybody's here has seen the movies on the multiverse. There might be different rules in different universes, but right here we do have what's known as universal laws and truths, meaning that regardless of the time period on this planet or the people on this planet, there are universal understandings that are here to guide us. But I didn't get that book. I did get the Bible growing up, and when that or any other holy, sacred text from any religion or any spiritual philosophy are looked at objectively and not just historically, I learned to interpret the Bible through dream language, that it's a symbol system on this planet. And all these sacred texts outside of religion, getting outside the door of religion, we can start to understand our dreams. We can start to understand that there are some guidebooks here that help us understand the soul mapping system. I mean, I even look at when I was very resistant about looking at the Bible after growing up the way I did. But when I got into understanding the symbol system of the dream language being the language of the soul, it's a picture language, is that in movies, I can even go to a movie and watch it and interpret it through the symbol system, which is pretty cool. And I am waving that into universal laws and truths, is that there's a universal mapping system through symbology that's available for us, whether you're Native American, whether you're Peruvian, whether you grew up in Egypt, there's always a mapping system provided. Oftentimes, scholars and mystics have left crumbs behind for us. And once I started, what was interesting is not only I read about them, but they made sense to me. I mean, growing up, the Beatitudes and what I learned from Jesus, he's kind of like my guy. I think Jesus was a shaman. He wasn't a Christian, he was a Jewish mystic dude. And I look at the universal things that he taught. You can also find that Buddha taught them. You'd also find that Zoroaster taught them. And through time and space, Confucius, Taoism, these things have been taught mostly to people in mystery schools or who are monks or in religious sects. And now it's time for all of us to know, as we come into this Aquarian age, is that you get to know and I get to know. And these impacted me about how I live my life, to live in greater harmony with the universe, is that we're here to be creators and to understand that there are certain energies that we can work with. And a lot of people have gotten to know the secret and the law of abundance because of the movie that came out. There's been a lot of authors through many years that are more modern that have started to speak to some of these, and probably this audience is aware of them, if not have studied them. But I find that really directs my life in a lot of ways. Some of the other things that began to happen was the importance of doing a spiritual practice daily. Just the concentration exercises. I'll remember my brother back then said something. He said, "You're so religious." I kind of took offense to it because I didn't want to be religious. And he said, "No, I mean, you're very disciplined." I'm like, "Oh." But as soon as I started doing these things, it's kind of like going to the gym. If you don't go to the gym, you can't get the benefit. So 10 minutes a day, going up to 20 minutes a day or so, can be highly beneficial to opening your intuition and starting to help you understand your dreams and remember your dreams, but also start to have mystical experiences of your own that you just don't believe me, because I had an experience. I mentioned in what I sent you is that I had a white light experience after 4 years of doing this work. And in the beginning, I never trusted myself, as most people don't. I remember doing stuff, and I did have a lot of synchronicities, start to happen in the beginning, which was very clear. But to actually trust my intuition, it took me a while to really trust what I was experiencing. And yet, a couple of years out, I was teaching here in Fort Collins and running a school, and I had started to struggle with kind of the setup or the hierarchy in the school. The teachings were timeless. They were amazing. And the people I got to meet were the first time I really felt like I had a soul family community. And all the hard stuff rolled downhill. I'd say an expletive, but maybe I shouldn't do that here. And usually the higher up in the organization, the more challenges you had because of the way they ran it. And it was not setting well with me, but I was like, well, I don't want to just quit. I don't know what to do. Where would I go? This is like my life. And so I had a student who said she did shamanic journey work. And I thought, well, what is that? And it's nothing like what I've been doing the last 18 years or so. But I went to her house, had a cup of tea, talked with her. I said, I really need to, get clear about where's my next step in my life, because this has been my life. And so she didn't give me any psychedelics that I'm aware of. That would have been way outside my comfort zone back then. And we did go up to her spare bedroom. I laid on her bed, and she began taking me through what seemed like a past life regression. But I never trusted that stuff as much as I'd done a couple of those things back then. And I remember as soon as I closed my eyes and she said, I want you to imagine a hallway. I could see a hallway just like I can see you on this video here. And I was somewhat like, wow, how's that happening? Because I'd close my eyes, I'd see colors, but I never saw something. And then she said, I want you to see that there's doors down the hallway. And I saw doors. And she said, well, choose a door. So I opened this door in my imagination, and there is this beautiful garden out there. And I was like, wow. And I looked down, and there is this tiny fairy angel. And I had a thought. My thought was, I would love to hug her. And as soon as I did, I shrank in size. I hugged her and I burst into light. The room was gone. There was nothing. I was pure energy, and I was in what I consider God consciousness or superconscious mind. And I was gone from this physical reality. I'm sure my body was laying on that bed in this reality, but I was not aware of it because I was in pure, I called it my mind orgasm. It was pure bliss. It was pure love. I didn't die. I was given a gift. And because I don't know, I guess I had some good prayers in there, and she was a good facilitator. And so about 5 hours or more, I don't even know exact time, something pulled me back. And I remember looking at my watch going, oh my gosh, I got to go. I got to teach tonight. And as I drove to school to teach, I saw neon auras everywhere. And I had seen auras before, but this was psychedelic looking. It was vast, colorful neon auras. And I had a small group of students that night. I do not know how I taught because I was so fascinated by what I was experiencing. And this went on for 3 days. And I remember calling this gal that night. I said, what did you do to me? She said, well, I saw it too. And I'm like, that wasn't an answer. But the main thing that I got, besides a phenomenal experience, I was so clear when I came out to, I left the school 2 weeks later, and my next journey on my adventure began. But I remember being in this pure white light, there were two consciousnesses that I was aware of besides myself. We didn't have bodies, it was just this awareness. We were not speaking, it was telepathy, it was pure knowing. And in that experience, I remember knowing that if I had a question, the only answer was love. But I didn't have any questions because I was immersed in love. And so when I came back, it was really easy to make my choice to move on and go to my next phase in life, which ultimately I created a metaphysical store and some more adventures unfolded. But, that direct experience is what this journey is ultimately about. And I think that the veils are thinner than ever now. So any spiritual practices that someone can adopt to begin going deeper mentally, emotionally, spiritually is going to be where our opportunities are. I want to use the word work, but I'd like to take the word work out. We're here to be light beings. we're changing our reality. We've been working our butts off in this linear world. It's time to get vertical and to show up to be present in the beauty and the light. And there's a lot of different exercises that we can do. I'll see if I can offer some others up before we end today. But this series of events, I was committed to going to classes, I was committed to exercises. Some of the spiritual work I did later after I left the school, I did a circles of life energy training with some dear friends. They became dear friends. And I remember after a weekend workshop of doing all this circles of life work, which is different ways of working in your field and with sacred geometry and numbers, and really literally spinning the energy through your field at different points in your body. I had another massively mystical experience where I was transported to Egypt and then I was back in the hotel room. And it was like I was in a different time as a priestess in the temples in Egypt, and then I was back in the hotel room waiting for one of my friends who was there with me to come back to the room. I was like, "Oh my gosh." So it was again opening up the energy field through these practices that gave me the opportunity to fly free of my body as I know it in this dimension and to be in another time space, be aware of it, then come back. It was not a memory. It was more like a teletransportation to another place. So I haven't talked all about Hinduism and all those things, but I can add to this, but I thought those seemed relevant to what I had to share.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. What a life-changing experience that you had with the white light experience. It sounds so similar to near-death experiences that many people have. But as you said, you didn't die.
Yeah. And it is everything I've read with people with near death experiences, very similar. And I've asked my guides, why haven't I been able to reproduce this? As you mentioned earlier, I've worked with plant medicines for the last, since I got into on my shamanic path for quite a few years now. And they're about as close as I can come to it with some pretty phenomenal experiences, but they were not the same. And, I've had some surgeries. I thought, oh, maybe I'll leave my body and go back. And it's not happened in my conscious awareness. And my guides, what they've told me is that it was a gift to remember what I know. The way I was taught in my metaphysical school about the different levels of consciousness, they have a mind chart that looks like a pyramid. And at the top point is the I am God consciousness. And then we have the subconscious mind. And then we have our conscious waking state. And the inner levels of conscious, the subconscious is really where we store wisdom, where we have information that helps us manifest and create. It's where we plant our seeds. Kind of like the quantum field, there's an individuated area, and there's also a collective area of the subconscious. Superconscious mind, the I am consciousness, the way they taught me is that you have to earn your right in there. You cannot slip into the superconscious level. So I know I've had a lot of spiritual lifetimes as a monk and a priestess and medicine woman in different lifetimes. So somehow I was taken to a place of pure love that gave me something I need for this life to help me remember, I think, what I'm here to do. I've been dedicated to this path, I think, since I jumped on it consciously. And I'm here to also tell people that there's great hope and light, that this is a play that we're in, that this is a dream, and we need to learn to be awake or conscious in this dream, and that we're not alone, that there is an incredible amount of love holding us in the space. And so one of the other things that I learned and I teach is that whatever we focus on expands. So if anybody can grab onto that hope, that light, that love that I'm talking about today, and just keep coming back to it best as you can, that's going to be one of the greatest healing things that can be offered up for more of that to come in.
Thank you for sharing. So you mentioned a few minutes ago Hinduism, and in another video of yours, I heard you talking about how you visited an ashram in the Himalayas. I would love to hear about that. I've always been really drawn to the Himalayas, and in another life, I probably would have traveled to the Himalayas and become a monk. So I'd love to hear your experience.
Well, it was awesome. Actually, I obviously have had the path of falling down to get up to go run a race somewhere else because I've had repeated suffering cycles. And that it was 2007 and it was Thanksgiving. And the holidays have been hard for me for a long time, no matter what I've been doing spiritually. And I had started plant medicine work a couple of months earlier, but at this time, I was waking up on that holiday having a bit of a rough day. So I decided to stay home and read that day. But before that happened, I threw down an epic prayer. Now, I love prayer. I love speaking to the divine, whether you call it the universe, God, Krishna, I don't care what you call it. I know that there's divine consciousness. And so I work with it a lot. And I threw down the gauntlet to my guides. I said, hey, I am tired of suffering. I need your help. Help me stop suffering. Either get me out of here. I not only threw down the gauntlet, I said, I will go anywhere and do anything. Help me. And that is a really important key, is that we need to surrender and be willing once the guidance comes. Otherwise, why would our guides give us any guidance if we're not willing to do what it takes? So anyway, I start reading that day. I'm in bed reading, just thinking I'm going to hang out all day. About 10 in the morning, I become aware of Ganesha, the little elephant-headed god, who's the first shaman of the Himalayas. And he's all about removing blocks. But I think he's been a guide. I know he's been a guide for many lifetimes. I just wasn't aware of it until then. And I was painting the mythical goddess Tarot then. So I had a lot of goddesses around me. But he shows up and I say, hey, did you come to answer my prayers? I didn't hear anything. I'm like, okay, I'll just keep reading. About an hour later, inwardly, I hear Parvati. And I'm like, Parvati? She's a goddess from India. Who is she? I'm painting this tarot deck with goddesses. What's this about? So I go look her up on the internet. She is like this divine mother of all the gods and goddesses and the mother of Ganesha, the first shaman of the Himalayas, the elephant-headed guy. I'm like, oh, okay, are you two here to help me? So go on to suffice it to say, I got all this guidance during this day, but I wasn't clear exactly what to do with it. I just knew they were with me. The next, Pele came in later that day, who I did have to paint. And so I got up the next morning and I looked at this book called Pele's Wish by Sandra Ray. And she brought in breath work into this part of the world with this guy, Leonard, I forget his last name. But anyway, I'd been guided to this book in case I wanted to connect to Pele and her energy. I don't read the book. I open it up and Sandra Ray begins to speak about going to Babaji's ashram in India. So there's a synchronicity here. I'm not just wondering, I promise. So I'm like, I lean into the book like, I need to know this. And Babaji was one of the guides of Jerry, who was the head of the school of metaphysics I was in. So I was brought into Kriya Yoga through Babaji's lineage in my 20s. And so I'm like, my eyes are wide open. I'm paying attention. I know I'm supposed to do this. What is this? And so she begins to speak of going to see Babaji. He's an avatar who's incarnated on this planet several times, at least, that we know about. And in the 70s, they built an ashram for him up in Haitakan, which is high up in the Himalayas at the top of the Ganges River. And I am very interested. I'm like, I'm reading like a crazy person. They talk about shaving your head in a ceremony called Mundan to release your karma. I'm like, I got to do that. I got to do that. So I go to her website, and when I open it up, it says Babaji is calling. And I'm like, I'm paying attention. This is like, hello. And as I read, she's getting ready to take a group in April 2008, not too long from where I am. And it's for celebration of the Divine Mother called Navaratri. And I'm reading this whole thing thinking, I have to go. I have to go. This is where I need to go next. And I get down to the bottom of who do I contact to register or get questions answered. And every time you go to the ashram, or when you go to the ashram initially, they give you a Hindi name before you leave. Her Hindi name is Parvati. Her name is Parvati Pauline Wade. I'm like, you cannot make this stuff up. This is like, so I immediately signed up and I went on the trip in April the following year. And I spent about 18 days in the ashram, went to Delhi, and I began to have past life memories. It was so familiar to me. And when we got up to Haidakon up in the mountains, I began to have more past life memories of being a monk up there and of a lifetime where I could not be in I had just broken up from a relationship. That was part of the heartache I was working on in that time period. That was part of my suffering, was a broken heart. And so I ended up having a vision of what that relationship was like back probably in the 17 or 1800s. I had been in one as a male in that lifetime. He was the female. We shifted genders, but we were not allowed to be together because we were not of the same sect of people. And so I ended up going to the mountains and becoming a yogi, an ascetic who lived up the mountains and was completely happy to know God. I didn't quite figure out the relationship and know God, but so that set a series of events in, and I did shave my head in ceremony there to release my karma. That was pretty phenomenal. We did Hindu fire ceremony. So we lived in the ashram, did kirtan, and everything that you do in an ashram during that time and with the celebration, it was phenomenal. But I highly, even if you're not going to go be a monk this life, I highly recommend if you get the opportunity to go give yourself a gift and go on a journey over there.
Maybe I will.
Yeah, it sounds like you've probably got some familiarity and some memories
Mm.
somewhere in your soul about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience. So, what is the fire ceremony like?
Oh, it's pretty amazing. So they have a huge fire pit. Now, in the ashram itself, there's always smaller fire pits because they do prayers and burn in one location every day, year long. Every day, 24 hours a day, there's a fire burning in they're like these sacred places where they gather what's called vibhuti, which is sacred ash. And it's a highly vibrational product from all the prayers and the fire releasing anything that needs alchemy and bringing in blessings. And so you literally put the sacred ash under your tongue. Now, during Navaratri, they have a huge fire pit. It must have been 20 by 15. And so it's been burning, I think, even before we got there. But when we go to make offerings, we might throw a coconut. We'd go buy a coconut locally, could throw that in to crack our little egos open and try and clear them out. So there'd be different offerings that anyone who was there could offer to the fire pit, but the yogis would tend to it for that 18-day period. And then at the end of it, they let it die down and they take some of that ash and they sent home with us. So we got sacred ash from the fire pits that were going on constantly, as well as the sacred ash from that particular ceremony that year.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. So, you've had several experiences with plant medicine, and again, probably way more than we can fit into our time, but would you be open to sharing a couple of the most significant ones?
Sure. I think I'll share the very first one I had because I didn't know what I was getting myself into. The year prior to going, I said I'd never do anything like this when I met a gal who went to Peru and did this. And then I met a group of people that I began to study with, and I trusted them, and I was interested in their 2-year shamanic program. And when I was talking to Jose, he's like, well, it's not for everybody. I thought, why are you dissing me, man? I want to do this program. And he said, well, we work with indigenous people's plant medicines and it's not for everyone. I said, well, how do I find out? And so I'd go through a clearing process to be approved. And I went on my first experience actually here in the United States. It's very underground. I can't tell you where it was. I might have to kill you. No. But there's a lot of plant medicine ceremonies going on all around the United States, even though it has to be underground right now due to our our legislation, our government, but it's much looser. So I went and worked with ayahuasca for the very first time. And being as sensitive as I am, I'm very empathic and sensitive to things. I don't need a lot of plant medicine. And so I remember going up to, it's a small group. I went up to my teacher and she gave me a small amount. And then it's done in the dark when you work with ayahuasca. It's a night ceremony. It's a medicine from Peru. It's actually 2 plants that make up the brew. It's a tea. It's the Banastropus capivine and then a plant with harmaline, which is typically chacrona out of the jungles of Peru. And it has prayers in it. And so I don't know what to expect. So I'm just laying there, not knowing what I'm feeling. And about an hour and a half in, there's an opportunity to take a little bit more medicine. So I go up and I ask for some. And the teacher said, "What are you feeling?" Because I think she's like, "Are you sure? Because you don't want to take too much, let me tell you. It's not fun." And so I said, "I'm just kind of feeling tingly. I don't know what to expect." And so she gave me a little bit more medicine. And I go sit down. And at this point, they start doing healing work in the dark. I don't know what's going on. And I hear her call some man up to get a healing. But because I can feel and sense, especially when I was altered too, on top of that, this is a purgative medicine. So she did a healing. He actually puked in a bucket, thank God. And I could feel the energy come across the room. And I thought, oh, I don't want to do that. What's going on over there? I don't know what's happening because I can't see. It's in the dark. Well, my name gets called next. And I'm like, oh dear. And so I go up and I get a nice clearing from this lady. And she passes me on to another guy who's an assistant who became a really good friend of mine. But he works on me and he gave me some nuggets for my life force. I gave a kidney to my brother back in 2001 and he picked up on it. And so I go and I sit back down. Now, the main part of what started to happen was the medicine is really starting to be active in my system. And as it is, I'm aware of my father standing in front of me at age 17. Now, my dad was a prisoner of the Japanese of World War II. And he went over at age 17 to Wake Island and was captured after 17 days holding the Japanese off. He actually was responsible for sinking the first warship of the Japanese off Wake Island, which is crazy. And so I don't even know what my intention was for this ceremony, but I see my dad at age 17 and I completely feel, sense, know the trauma he went through as a young man. He was 135 pounds, age 17, when he went over 5'10". He came back at 89 pounds and almost died of beriberi. I do Ho'oponopono. It's a Hawaiian practice of forgiveness. I learned it many years ago. So the medicine, as I'm seeing him, sensing his whole trauma, I start weeping and crying and throwing up to clear this fright and fear that I know was passed on to me through my DNA. The suffering I've had and some of the patterns are very connected to what my dad went through that I discovered partly through the medicine and other work I've been doing ancestrally. I was like, so that was clearing. That went on for a while. And then it shifted. My dad disappeared. And I was aware of the suffering of humanity for the choices we made to be in World War II. So I started crying and weeping and doing Ho'oponopono. Again, same kind of process. And then one more thing, once that cleared, I was in a Mayan lifetime, very similar, same type process. And then once all that's cleared, this is hours, is that I am aware of being in Egypt and Horus greets me and he says, "Isis is our mother, you're my sister, you're royalty." And I'm like, well, my brain is like, yeah, sure, I'm royalty. And he's like, but I was at home. I felt at home in Egypt. And I don't remember seeing anything. I just remember him greeting me and my whole connection to the Egyptian deities and to Isis and Horus and to the planet Sirius, which was another experience I had at a much later date from my first beginnings. But I was fully activated with visions and this experience of moving, clearing a lot of trauma that was in my field, in my DNA, but also working with humanity. Because what takes place in these ceremonies for I've sat hundreds of times now over the last 18 years. And both as facilitating and also sitting personally. And everything I know is that we're in this matrix of energy that is so much bigger than our conscious minds can perceive. That when you're in working with these plant medicines, they help you see, sense, feel the matrix that we're in on a soul level. Aya of ayahuasca means soul. And she's known as the little death. She's known as the vine of the soul. And she is very good at clearing fear, fright, and trauma and bringing you more center into the essence of love. She's called our mother for a reason. She is this loving energy, but she's also fierce. And she'll help clean out the things that create addiction, the things that create suffering, the things that create all the difficulties we have in this world. She really is very good medicine to help us restore ourselves emotionally, but she also resets the brain chemistry. She'll reset the neural pathways and open up new neural pathways for those who work with them. And I only recommend, if anybody wants to do this work, make sure you're referred to someone really good that you know what they've done and who they are. That it should be a very safe container, because there's a lot of people out there in the greed model who are not necessarily in integrity, even if they may be offering this. I have to add that in because of the caveat. I fortunately fell into a group of people who had been doing this work for over 30 years and are very well, they know their stuff and they're very good at what they do. And so I was very fortunate that I was led to them.
Wow. So for someone who might just be getting into this, do you have any advice on how to tell if somebody's genuine?
It's not all about money. I know that it's not cheap. There's a range. You do not have to go to Peru to do this. I'm not sure how much. It's kind of interesting to be here. I know I'm going to be exposed to a lot of people. And there's a part of me that says I'd be happy to talk to you, which could be kind of like overwhelming for me in the long run if people follow through and get hold of me. But I would always, if you don't have someone that is referring you that had a really good experience, I would say be patient and wait, because it will come to you when your time is ready. That's hard for our conscious mind to want to seek it out and then go, there are some good places in Peru. And I sat mostly with my teachers, a group of people that you have to go through my teachers to get to them. So I can't outwardly refer to that. But it's interesting because I have gone to a bad experience. I went and explored another place that I thought I had a good referral, and I'd been doing this work for many years, for 12 years before I did that. And I had a really challenging experience, and I had to call out the people there because they're putting people in danger. And so the way to look is just to know that, so to find someone who's had an experience, who's willing to talk about it and talk about, was the container safe? Was it a big group or a little group? There's Michael Beckwith and some people have opened up a place in Costa Rica called, space in the name of it. Hopefully it'll come back to me. Anyway, I've heard it's good, but something that concerns me is it's a lot of money, a lot more than what I think it should be. It's rather celebrity oriented, which concerns me. People with high powered dollars out of Hollywood have created it, thank goodness. And they have 60 people in a ceremony, which I think is outrageous. And that's my own personal experience. I started with 11 and I've gone up to about 25. That's about as big as I want to be in any ceremony. It's too much energy, and I'm not sure everybody's getting what they need in the ceremony. So big ceremonies are not necessarily a good place to start, and I really wouldn't want to go myself. So grassroots, find people. I know if it's in your field and it's your time, is this going to appear? Seriously, if somebody wants to get hold of me and say they listen to me here, I would talk to them about it personally. And if I get too many, then I'll figure it out.
I appreciate that. So I have one more question for you. Earlier in this conversation, you talked about how the different levels of consciousness and now how we have to earn our right to the super conscious level. How could somebody go about doing that?
Devotion to your spiritual practices and your journey to awakening, whatever your language is, that prayer, devotion, meditation. You can't it's kind of, again, going back to the gym or anything else that you want to be really good at. It's a journey of mastery and apprenticeship. Is to pray, is to have an altar, is to find ways that every day you give thanks, every day you connect to the divine. No matter how mundane our lives are, there's all this amazing magic going on. And if you're stuck in the mundane, start simply with prayer. You go, well, how do I pray? Like, say hello. It's like meeting a new person. It's like, hello to my higher self, hello to my guides or the divine. I may not see or sense or feel you right now, but I really want to be in communication with you. Can you help me? And then find a class that helps you meditate or do some of these concentration exercises. Anything along these lines is going to be opening you up at the top to your spiritual self. It's going to give you some tools and practices. And over time, it's going to open you to the gifts that are already in you. So I mentioned the subconscious. Imagine that it's like a place where there's all these jars. And let's say I'm an artist. I know I've been an artist a lot of lifetimes. I started really early in this life, drawing and doing stuff. Well, that jar is probably pretty full in my subconscious. My relationship jar, I think, is less than half full, except for just people I love. Personal relationships, I'm not sure what I got in that jar, but it might need some help. So as you go deeper into spiritual practices, even just mindfulness and meditation practices, or try what I said about the focusing, that begins to help you get into the subconscious mind and start working more with what you already have. And you may find a pathway that gets you into that God consciousness much more easily because you might have already been invested in it in other lifetimes. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, very helpful. Catherine, thank you so much for being willing to share with us today. And I'd love to give you a chance to share with the viewers where they can find you and anything that you have going on that you'd like them to know about.
Well, my website is my name, so KatherineSkaggs.com, if you can spell it. I know it's on this Zoom thing, I think.
Yeah.
KATHER, well, you'll have it posted, I'm sure. So my website has events. My website has new moon and full moon offerings. I've got more virtual things going on there. I've got some best-selling books and decks that are available. Artist, Shaman, Healer, Sage is a book I have on shamanism, also mystery practices, ceremonies, and rituals in that book. So there are daily practices in it, whether it's pure shamanism, it gets into Buddhism, it gets into universal laws and truths. That would be something you can get on Amazon or on my website. Also, I've got a tarot deck, Mystical Goddess Tarot, and an oracle deck, Masters of Light Wisdom Oracle, that I've also created that are helpful to do divination, to connect with spiritual guidance. But I'm also working on some online coursework in shamanism and mystery school, you'll be happy to know. Because I've got a bunch of clients who've been wanting to do that with dreams for a while. So I'm finally working on getting that online. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, and I'll have those links in the show notes so people can check those out if they're interested. Catherine, thank you so much for sharing.
Well, thank you, Melissa. I appreciate being here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for watching and listening. Your views, likes, comments, and shares truly make the biggest difference in supporting this channel. Don't forget to check the show notes for all the links to today's guest, as well as my links. You'll find me on social media at Love Covered Life, my website, lovecoveredlife.com, and the Be a Guest link for anybody who would like to be a guest on the channel. I have great news. Love Covered Life podcast is coming available on audio podcast. You can find it wherever you listen to your audio podcasts.